time is now 5:30. I would like to call this work session of the school board to order. Ms. Richardson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Burgess,
Here.
Mrs. Burnett,
Here.
Mr. Dorn,
Here.
Mrs. Sanderson is excused, and Miss Maple and Miss Marati are on Zoom.
Here.
Thank you. Mrs. Hardy,
Here.
the board has a quorum.
At this time, I'm going to turn it over to the administration.
All right. Thank you, President Hardy. I'd like to start by welcoming some guests at the table. We've got Danielle Logan, ESSA President. I believe Danette Peterson's going to be coming. And then Raul Lopez, our student rep, may be on Zoom this evening. These individuals are helping us in the school closure process and have been invited to the table to contribute to the conversations. Important to have a wide stakeholder base as we continue conversations about school closure, and I know they'll bring invaluable contributions to that discussion. So Danielle, thank you for being here, and thanks to Danette and Raul as they join us. For tonight's work, wanted to lay the groundwork. We'll focus on 4 things in this work session tonight, one being school closures. There'll be a high level in terms of departmental reports and how we would approach that work if the board decided to go forward with school closures. We'll then transition into a report from Andy DeGraw to talk about transportation, specifically that $800,000 fund balance from general fund to the transportation fund. Last time there were some questions around that, and I want to make sure folks have the opportunity to ask those questions and we chat through it as a board. Then we'll transition to Chain Beam, talking about the curriculum materials and the additional funds that were added into the proposed budget for that, bringing it back to that status quo of the budget the year before. And then lastly, IT equipment replacement. RJ will have an opportunity to speak about that. So that's what this evening's agenda will cover. So we'll get started into the school closure conversation. I wanted to start with the timeline so everybody was aware of when the board would be talking about school closure and the way that folks in the community can participate in the conversations being had. And so that timeline is starting this evening, February 12th, with a budget work session and departmental reports. February 16th, administration will meet with affected schools that will be proposed as recommended from the administration in terms of being on a short list for school closure. Administration will have those conversations face-to-face. We'll also follow up with an email to affected schools to ensure that they have that information directly from the school district. We'll also have a broader communications to the community on that day with an email, and the board packet will go live with our materials for Monday's work session. That'll lay out the information provided by administration for the specific schools that are on the school closure list. February 19th, there'll be a budget work session here in this room where we'll share the list of schools. February 22nd, there will be a budget committee meeting where the budget committee will not only talk just school closure, but they'll talk other things relevant to the budget. February 26th, there'll be a budget work session, and we've attached a public hearing to that, so that's an opportunity for the public to provide feedback on the budget. February 27th is a budget community forum at Lathrop High School at 6 p.m., and we invite the community to that. There'll be a budget overview. We'll go over a new tool that we're rolling out called Balancing Act. That's a simulation tool to interact with our budget. And then we'll have some roundtable conversations to allow people to provide feedback on our budget. March 4th, there'll be another budget work session and public hearing. March 5th, there'll be a regular school board meeting with public testimony. March 11th, there will be another budget community forum, this time at North Pole High School in North Pole. And then lastly, the week of March 18th, the school board will be taking action on their recommended budget. So any questions on the timeline before we start diving into departmental reports?
Mr. Doran.
Just a quick one in terms of the 16th and affected schools. That's going to be a range of, schools on a short list, so it's not 2 schools, it's going to be several that might.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. All right. At this time, I'd like to hop into, actually, before we hop into the departmental reports, I did want to talk a little bit about the school selection considerations. And we'll talk more in depth next time, specifically how this applies to schools on the short list. But did want the board to have an idea of how we're approaching this work. And so you can see the standards that we're applying to the schools that have made it onto the short list, starting with the condition of the building. So age, recent investment, status of major systems, electrical, plumbing, all of those things, as well as the amount of deferred maintenance on the building, were considerations that we considered for specific schools for closure. School utilization, so how many students are currently in that school compared to the capacity of the school. We have several schools that are underutilized at this point in time in terms of the number of students that are in the schools, and so that was a factor in consideration. Cost savings, so every school has a slightly different amount attached to it in terms of if we close that school, how much it would save the school district, and we'll go into specifics next week about that. Educational programming, are there currently any offerings at that school that are limited that could be approved by other schools? And then lastly, this is a big one, neighborhood impacts and geographical location. So what would be the impact on the local neighborhood? What's the impact when you start looking at transportation and redistricting? And also, how would nearby school capacity and population be impacted? So that's a big one. We have Ryan Hinton in the room tonight, but he'll really have an opportunity in a couple weeks to talk specifically about transportation and show the potentials for redistricting and dig into that work with the board for a lot of different questions there.
Mr. Doran.
I'm going to preface, and it's a quick question, but really appreciated getting this today and these procedures. Question on school utilization. Will you be looking at not only the capacity and how many are in there, but how the building is used? Because where we have district-wide programs, fewer kids in the classroom, so that utilization.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a part of it. We have some schools that are so underutilized that those barely even make a dent of a difference. And so, yes, we have looked at that, but the capacity in general is a major factor of that as well. Okay. All right, we'll move on, and I would like Jay Carey on to start our conversations this evening with a facilities and maintenance report.
We talk about processes. Let me grab it real quick. So first of all, sorry, can everyone hear me? First of all, the Facilities Maintenance Department will provide a project manager for this process. All the departments, along with the assistant superintendent, will meet at each school and walk through to identify items that they're responsible for. The departments with items in the buildings that will be responsible for boxing and removal of items. FMD will supply all the boxes. And if smaller boxes are needed, then it's going to be up to the individual department because we're supplying with just extra large boxes. And then each department will be responsible for the storage of these items if they're not going to another school. FMD and shipping and receiving will supply pallets when needed. and when pallets are used, we will supply a pallet tag that identifies where all the information where it's going. So if it's going to another school, we're going to provide a label tag for that. And then that's at the department level. At the school level, we will do an initial walkthrough with the principal of the school to identify what they are responsible for. There's going to be several meetings. There was lots of meetings with the departments as well involved, and providing assistance to the staff in closing of their building. And then we're going to inform the staff of the timeline. I didn't put it on here, but usually we do an end of school year list, and in this case, we're going to send out a list that's an end of school closure list to the staff. Then we're going to do a count of furniture, and then figure out which, who wants what furniture to go to which school. Teachers will be responsible for their own personal items and the removal of these items for the building. Teachers that will be transferring to locations can request boxes and pallets if a pallet, I feel like I've repeated that. If pallet is needed, they will be responsible for filling out a pallet tag and attaching it to the pallet. Custodians will not be responsible for packing up boxes, but they will assist in shrink wrapping and putting them on pallets when needed. FMD will assign a representative to each location that's closing to help with coordination. So at each location, there's going to be one FMD person that's responsible for the management of that school closure. And then we're going to go through FMD and working with shipping and receiving. And then we will be coordinating with shipping and receiving. They're going to be picking up and delivering pallets and furniture to their respected schools. We will be working with the borough during this whole process. So when we work with the borough, we also do a walkthrough with them once we're nearing the end of handing the building back to them. We're going to do a final walkthrough with the building, and then items that are not identified to go anywhere will eventually be surplus. Pretty quick. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Jay. We'll move to Human Resources with Ivory McDaniel.
Good evening. I think naturally the very first question that an employee is going to ask when they learn about the potential school closure is what's going to happen to me and my position. And so we outlined it in the packet that you received today. The biggest thing in terms of understanding is understanding how district-wide seniority works. And so our department has been working to provide that information to our staff. Today, an FAQ sheet went out to our teachers. Tomorrow, that will happen for our support staff, just so that people can understand the concept of district-wide seniority and how that plays into our staffing. And I just think that's really an important piece of this. But our first communication to staff as we walk through this potential closure and the decision that the board has to make, the first thing that we're going to talk about is timelines. We won't have an immediate response to where am I going. We won't have that because there's so many layers that work into our annual staffing process. For one, especially at the secondary level, they're working on course schedules and building their master schedule so that we know what teachers we need next year. We also need a decision made with the PTR even at the elementary level. So as all of those decisions start to come together, we can create a staffing plan for next school year. And from that, we'll be able to determine how many teachers we need and be able to look at placement in that manner. So the first thing that we would look at is timelines and communicating those timelines to the affected schools so that people know when they can expect communication and more information. And that's really our goal, is to provide that information, ensure that folks have an understanding of what is going on and how they may be impacted. And so one of the great things that we've done this school year is that we've provided an opportunity for any of our staff to be able to self-schedule appointments one-on-one with any of our HR coordinators so that they can talk about their individual situations. So whether folks are wanting to know about their seniority or considering retirement or want to talk about transfer opportunities, there's an ability for them to self-schedule appointments so that they can have that half-hour one-on-one time with our HR team so that they can help move through this process very informed. And on top of that, the mass communications that we would send out as well. So the process, while we have the potential school closures, there's so many different layers that go to the staffing process that we won't have an answer come over the next couple of weeks of how will I be impacted and where will I go. But we'll be able to provide them that preliminary information so that they understand the timeline and what options they have available to them.
Mr. Doran.
Could you address postings, especially if school decisions are made? I think they'll be actually made after postings would potentially start opening, but
So
how are we going to do that?
known vacancies for next year have already started. We've already started recruitment for known vacancies for next school year. So there's a variety of postings that are already out there, special education. There's some, I believe there's like science or math at the secondary level, counseling. So there's already some postings that are available for folks to look at. And if they have an opportunity and they're eligible per the contract to look at those postings, then they're eligible to apply for it. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure.
Okay, so in terms of postings for those who might be most affected, their school is closing, that how postings will be, or do they, once they know that they're in a possibility, should they start looking? I mean, I just want to get a timeline with the postings and when people know they need to move.
So in terms of our timelines, we would not, so it depends on tenured versus non-tenured. So we could tell tenured teachers right away that we anticipate providing them transfer opportunities, but it could not guarantee that at this point with the non-tenured teachers because of the reductions that are needing to be made in overall budget process. So it depends on whether what the status of the teacher is. It also, so they already know that they have tenured teachers an opportunity for internal transfers, and those have been posted, I believe, since the beginning of February. We started those. So we've communicated to let them know that there's opportunities. So regardless if your school's closing or not, there's transfer opportunities available to you. Once we've identified that the school is closing, if that person wants to, a tenured teacher wants to look at postings, then yes, they would be able to apply. We would not be able to guarantee non-tenured because we still need to go through the staffing process at that time. So hopefully that answers your question.
Close enough, thank you.
All right, thank you, Ivory. And if folks think about other things, we can always circle back around to executive directors too as we're having these conversations. I'd now like to turn it over to IT, which is either RJ or Andy DeGraw. Oh, no. Okay. And we can come back to IT too if, okay. Yeah, no problem. Let's skip to purchasing and warehouse.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. As Jay and actually, we didn't get to hear from RJ yet, but most of what we do in purchasing and warehouse is in support of what they're doing when it comes to school closures. So what I've come up with for the information that I provided to you in the agenda is very, very granular about all of the different things that we end up doing when it comes to the assistant superintendents deciding what the level of priority is when they're deciding what's going to happen with surplus furniture or surplus equipment. We would expect that they'll be deciding that the schools that have the highest influx of students coming to their schools are going to have a higher priority when it comes to where the equipment or furniture is going. So once we have that information, then we have been in purchasing, been most involved in what happens with surplus and furniture. And then, of course, RJ will be handling technology. Jay is going to be handling anything that's facilities related. And Amy in nutrition services is going to handle any of the equipment that it goes into the kitchens. And then once they decide where those things are going to be going, then we would be the ones in contact with the other schools to survey them on what, we have all these things available. what do you think you might need at your school? So we put together a mechanism for them to make those selections. And then in purchasing and warehouse, we go to the field and we tag those items so that we can try to make it so that we're only making one stop between point A and point B. If those schools make those selections, then we tag them for immediate routing to those other schools. If they don't know what they need, then we might retrieve those items and bring them back to the warehouse. For surplus, we would then put them on our school district up for grabs website so the other schools can see a picture of what it is. And that's actually something that I want to try to get more ahead of, is a picture. Sometimes that speaks to the schools a little bit better than the descriptions we had provided in the past. So we'll provide them with the best information we've got about what surplus is available so we can get it from point A to point B. But then we'll store things at the warehouse. If the items are deemed unusable with no value, then we're going to support those things being disposed of. But we do also have mechanisms in place for storing items and e-cycling with technology, or recycling if it is something that can be recycled at lower or no cost to the school district. There is also some contract. Right now we're operating as though all of our schools are going to be here next year. So all of our contracts are in place for the services that we're going to be requesting. We do request funding through USAC E-rate. So once the schools are going to be closing and once we know which schools those are going to be, we're going to be working on contract modifications so that we can make sure the vendors know what is going to be happening with those schools and do the modifications we need to do, make adjustments to the funding requests that we've put in with E-rate, and get everything ready for those schools to be changed. Any questions about our role?
So as far as the items moving from one school to another, is there a hierarchy or a system between like our neighborhood schools and our programs and charters as far as who can request or access?
That's a good question. There is a hierarchy, but although purchasing isn't the one that decides it, I believe it would be at the leadership level. Again, I think the emphasis is on which schools are going to be receiving more students than others. But again, I'll leave that to you all to decide who's going to be have the highest priority.
Yeah, I think last time we followed what Emily said in terms of if a school is receiving a significant amount of more students, that they would have first dibs at desks and things that support students. And then after that, that's a note I'll take down in terms of maybe clearly articulating that hierarchy after that.
Ms. Burnett?
Just out of curiosity, say after all is said and done, we still have some surplus left over, are we able to offer that to other programs in other districts and other schools instead of just kind of throwing it in a basement somewhere?
Yes, that's a really good question. And a lot of it will come down to the superintendent's decision, but according to the state statute, we do have the ability to share our state-funded resources with other state-funded entities. So we, as we did with the last closure, we did reach out to other school districts, and with the superintendent's permission, we were able to advance those items that hadn't been claimed by our school district to the others.
All right, quiet group tonight. So, well, thank you, Emily. I appreciate it. IT, are we back up and running? Perfect.
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll hand it on over
Sorry,
to you
it was
then.
quite embarrassing. But thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. So when it comes to school closures, how about now? Sound good? Okay. So thank you. When it comes to school closures, there's a number of technology considerations to take place. Before we even approach the school, the first changes that will need to be made are changes to the school codes in our software, changes to references in our workflows, and then for the students, changing their registration, any lottery information where their Google accounts are attached to, the bus route software, etc. To go along with that, we will then have to make sure all of those references in PowerSchool are set up, and then schedule differences will have to be handled. You know, some schools will have classes that other ones do not. we'll have to make sure that those work out. And so then when we approach the school, we have to secure the building, make sure that nothing walks away, and we will go through and we'll collect the devices, the teacher devices, the student iPads, student Chromebooks, the Apple TVs in the classrooms, and then we will salvage what we can to reuse, and other devices that are depreciated we will attempt to sell if we have the opportunity to do so. So lessons learned from before is there's quite a few devices in a school, more than what we expect. Stuff that's been left from many years ago, things that have shown up that we didn't expect to find, and those can be opportunities to reuse, or it can be more kind of electronic waste to be removed. So then we take out our network equipment, any type of battery backups we have, any wireless access points, security cameras, all of our servers, our phones, the network racks for the servers and the servers. So lessons learned from last time, about 80% of the equipment in the school was able to be harvested for reuse. And that's pretty much it right now on our plan based on what we've learned from the last time. Questions?
Ms. Peterson?
I just wanted to clarify. I think I understood what you said. Educators, teachers, classroom teachers, and other certified educators that are moving to a different school will still be able to keep their Chromebook or iPad that's assigned to them over the summer months.
Correct. If any work needs to be done, or if we need to recatalog them, then we'll get them back and ship them right back out. But that's kind of our new policy after last time, is we want everything to come back to us to verify and then put back out in place. I guess there are some devices from Joy that are still floating around in various buildings. So we'd like to make sure that we can get a hand on everything.
Danette, did you have a follow-up? I see the wheels turning there.
So when you say, thank you, when you say it's going to come back and then be redistributed, would they still have access to that Chromebook or iPad over the summer months? Like,
yes.
I'm trying to imagine the timing of coming back and then being redistributed.
So depending on what needs to happen, it can be like a matter of minutes, or we can come to the educator, check it in, check it out right there. Like, it doesn't have to leave their custody. We just want to make sure that we can assess the condition of the device. So.
All right. Well, thank you, RJ. Great job. We'll move it over to Student Support Services and Brianna Gray.
Yes, hello. Just a reminder of what Student Support Services is. So we have social emotional learning and prevention. We have A&E, Alaska Native Education, migrant education, McKinney-Vento and foster care programs, and we also provide administrative support to our title schools. Excuse me. And typically around March, April, we decide which schools are going to be designated title school based off of free and reduced lunch numbers. And so if a title school were to be impacted, we do have staff at the schools that are not funded out of title funding, and we would be able to move those individuals to a different school. And so we would work with our executive director team, our program coordinators, and potential schools on what their needs are and which schools we would move staff to. And then we would also analyze data to see which schools, if we would add a school, or if that would just increase funding at the current title schools that we have. Non-title schools would be very similar. We would look at what staff we have at the schools and then move those individuals to different schools while working as a team with our executive director team. And we would also, I would also recommend looking thoroughly through the migrant and A&E budgets as well as our title budgets to see how we can reallocate how we would like to support schools based off of those needs. And then Also, this year we've seen an increase in self-support, so social emotional learning support from schools who were impacted by school closures this year. So we would prioritize and increase support at those impacted schools. Make sure that we are pulling reports during the first few weeks of schools to see how our programs can support and reach out to families to make sure they have what they need to be successful. And then also just making sure that all of our information is currently updated, such as brochures, websites, and flyers, because during this time, families really look to those items to make sure that they can reach out for support. So that's all that. And then also we do have items at the schools, and we would just take those items here. We have offices here, and then we reallocate those inventories.
Mr. Doran?
Okay, you're touching upon some of it, but if we could get a little bit better clarification on students who may be at a school, Title I, who might move to a school that doesn't have Title I. And I'm concerned because it was a misnomer that last time around when we were dealing with this, that the funding followed the student, which it does not. And so a number of those students who had high needs went to schools that did not have those services. What is the plan, or where is it in the planning to actually provide them some supports, particularly once those students get to their new school and parents and kids have been beneficiaries of some strong supports that are no longer there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. And so the title supports are for specific schools as a whole, and so, as you know, and so when those students are moving out to non-title schools, you're correct in that the money doesn't necessarily follow the students, nor does the additional staff members that were at that Title I school. But theoretically, when they're moving to that new school, those intervention services aren't necessarily needed at the same level as they were at the other schools, because we're not picking up all students and necessarily sending them to another school. If we were, it's quite possible that that school would then become Title I eligible, and at that time it's possible that the funding would move with the students. With all that said, we have intervention supports in place, certainly at the elementary level, for specifically READS Act interventions for our students. And that's what we're really focusing on with our K-3 students right now. At all of our students, Title I schools certainly have some additional tutors on top of that, but our non-title schools are bringing in supports from volunteers and additional staff members to try to provide those intervention services as well. And so I would like to give Bree an opportunity to speak to it too, if she had anything else to add.
Yeah, and we also have staff like A&E and migrant and other staff that are not only at title schools. And so when we talk about A&E, migrant, and our other programs, they are district-wide. So we do serve students who are not only at title schools. And so we do maintain contact with those schools, see what they need and how we can support them as well. And so that will be up to us to pull those reports, see which students moved, and then reaching out to families to make sure they have what they need to be successful.
Can I do a follow-up?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to suggest leaving that conversation here. I appreciate both your responses, but I think we really need to make sure we build it into our conversation going forward. And once we identify those schools, if we do decide to close a school, and where those students would go, because I think if we're depending on volunteers, that's not a good plan. And also the concern with the READS Act, we know that it is not, that schools are absolutely stretched to do what the intent of the READS plan is, because we are not funded for it. And we do know that there were definitely issues in the last closure and distribution of students, that they may still move to a school that we're still not going to provide those supports. They don't qualify for A&E, they don't qualify for Title I, they don't qualify for a number of these different things. So I just want to make sure it's on the table and that we really have a solid conversation about that as we go forward this spring.
Yeah, and I guess my response to that is we're not relying on volunteers for the education of their students, but I do want to be really clear that they may not receive the same supports that they received at a Title I school. So let's be honest about that. And, we will try everything we can to move resources to other schools, but we're in this predicament because of the lack of resources. And so we'll certainly continue the conversation, and as we dial in on specific schools, if one is title specific, the board will certainly have a look at what are redistricting possibilities for those students. And that would be top of mind as we're looking at different schools to position students at, that we can position them in the way to have the best supports possible. But wanted to be clear and honest about that, those intervention services that they're provided at Title I schools don't always follow them to other schools.
Could I just say thank you very much, because that's the clarity we need that was not necessarily there the last time, or at least there was maybe attempts for it, but it was not broadly understood. So I appreciate the clarity.
All right. Well, we will move on to teaching and learning then for our next departmental report.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the time. I appreciate that RJ had a little section called lessons learned, because I think my entire list is lessons learned, either what did work or what did not work or what did we not think about in the first place. And I'll start with the very first thing, and I'm not going to read all of the bullets, but the very first thing was when Jay said that they're buying only extra large boxes. I can't put books in extra large boxes, so we buy our own boxes because they're just too heavy. So like little things like that. So if you notice, our list is divided up kind of like a timeline. What we can do up front before school is over, what we can do in May to get ready as the school year comes to an end, what happens once on that last day of school, and then what happens during the summer. And a lot of our work happens, most of our work happens before school actually closes. You can see that lots of our stuff has to do with packing and moving things, specifically textbooks and other teaching materials. You'll notice also one of the bullet points talks about having a point of contact for each school. We'll make sure that T&L has one person that the school can reach out to that can answer all of the questions. In April, one of the other things is that we would go and start packing up book rooms and other rooms that are not being used. We can take care of those things before school gets out. They won't go anywhere, but we'll start packing books and putting them in boxes, so once it is time to actually move things, that we can actually do it quickly. We'll create a spreadsheet once we know what schools we are talking about, to say that this box full of these things are going to move to this school. We can organize it in that way, so we don't need boxes of books coming here and then we start figuring out where it goes. We can figure out up front where it's going to go based on the number of students that will be moved to different schools. As far as the library, we'll start packing up some of the things a little bit early, but not too early, because we still want kids to use the library up as long as they can. But what we will start a weeding out process early on, because as we go through it, first off, libraries go through a weeding out process every few years anyway, so we'll just do that at that point. Once May hits, then we'll start talking about figuring out what's going to go where. And one of the things that we need to make clear from our world is, what are the teachers going to take home that is their personal items? What are the teachers going to pack in boxes that are going to go to their new school? And what are the teachers maybe going to pack that do not belong to them, but they'll stay in their classrooms? Textbook, teaching materials, things like that. And then we'll start helping teachers pack those items also. There's some other rooms in the school that we can probably start packing mid-May or so. Science rooms, music rooms, rooms that are not used all of the time, but are used from time to time by schools. And we'll start helping folks pack those up also. And we'll also start planning for some shopping days for teachers to deal with the surplus items. So once if I'm a teacher and I know that I'm going to move from school A to school B, I've packed up my personal things to take home. I packed up the things that I know are going to go to school B with me. And then if I need to take something else, then that's fine. There's going to be, and this is one of our lessons learned, a lot of things left in the school that the teachers don't want to take with them, and they need to go somewhere. So that could be art supplies or beakers or chemistry supplies. I mean, it could be a wide range of things that the teachers don't necessarily need to take with them, but some other teachers at another school may find use for them. So we did that last time. That worked well, so we'll do that again this time. Probably 2 or 3 different times to help folks so we can narrow down how much things Jay's folks have to move over the summer. And then once summer hits, we'll go in as the teachers finish up, and we will kind of clear out the last few rooms. What we did last time was basically once we've gone through a room, we put a sign on the door and say that it is done and that we have cleaned it out. The only thing we want maybe different this time is for the principal to go through the rooms also, just to check all the cabinets, everything else, because there's a lot of things that are left behind that my folks went and literally spent weeks and weeks packing boxes after school was over of things that were left in cabinets. So we would need a little support with that. But as you can see, lots of our work is before school is out, but also during the summer, there'll be a lot of extra packing afterwards that my folks will help out with.
Ms. McDaniels.
I just wanted to add on and to emphasize that one of the things that we did for the prior school closures is that we looked at a different school calendar for those impacted schools to provide, because the first question is, where are the teachers going to find all this time to pack their belongings, right? And so there is some language carved out in the negotiated agreement for classroom moves, but we recognize that this was above and beyond that. So we would work again with our associations and with our schools to look at a reduced school calendar to provide the staff the additional time to be able to facilitate this move so that they're not, it's not taking over their summers and their evenings as well. So that's something that we would work through again.
I have a question on that. So reduced school calendar meaning student contact days, less of those, or what are you?
Did, and maybe Kate, if you remember, Kate did a lot of the logistics of that last time, so she probably dive a little deeper into that than I.
Yes, we identified at each school kind of a slightly earlier end of school day. So if the school year ended, I think about 3 days earlier for the schools that were closing. We made sure to allow time for an end of school celebration. We talked a lot about closure and having that be something that was supported by the school district. And then teachers had additional time to finish out. A lot of that had been done already. I mean, so we also built in time along the way.
Mr. Doran?
I was going to say, I really appreciate that planning. That was basically my question, so that we keep teaching right to the end, as well as time for the teachers to pack. So I think that'll address both of it. Thank you.
All right, were there any questions on Zoom? All right, well, that concludes the conversation on school closure this evening. As far as the departmental reports we had, next week we'll certainly have more in-depth information into specific schools and continue the conversation. I also did want to note the packet that the board received. This is a working document that the administration has put together and will continue to add to. So at the end of this process, it serves as a resource and hopefully encompasses the entire plan that we have going forward. And so the questions tonight, I've taken note of those and we'll try to build those into the document. If you have questions between now and the next work session, and this goes for the entire budget season, please let me know, because we are trying to make this plan and document guide as useful as possible for not only the board, but for those that are interested in the process that we're taking on.
Mr. Doran?
I've got 2 broad questions regarding it. Could you talk a little bit, or maybe bring to us in the future, a communication or messaging plan, so that it doesn't, what's the plan so it doesn't sit on the principal's shoulders? I mean, obviously they're the ones who are going to have the face-to-face with parents and kids and staff, et cetera. But ways that in our communication and messaging from the district level, we can help provide support and also get ahead of the curve so that they have the talking points clear as to why their school, why, and how it's going about. That was the one departmental piece perhaps that I would look at in here. I don't know if you had any reaction to that or just.
Yeah, so that plan will kick off on Friday because there's the initial communications that go around that, kind of the specific like schools being named on the list. And then obviously after a school is named, there'll be quite a bit more communications involved. Rebecca, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to speak to in terms of what was on your mind throughout the process. If not, we can bring that back next time and highlight, the communication strategy that we would take around this.
No, and then just most immediately, we already talked about, so there's already a plan for, notifying the school communities themselves. I mean, there'll be in-person notification of the staff, so that won't be like an email, that'll be in-person conversations with the staff. As far as the parent notification, that will be so on Friday after staff are notified, there'll be communications, sort of personalized communications to the school community, like the parents, that'll go out to the school communities that are impacted. And then there'll be a district-wide communication that goes out on Friday, as well as some sort of press release or media notification, because there's going to be a lot of interest. So those will be the most immediate things that go out. And then part of those communication will include not just what's happening, the why behind it, but then also let them know about the ways that people can engage in the process. So what's happening next and the opportunities for engagement and feedback as far as, the upcoming board meetings that are happening, the work sessions where they can watch, where they can provide feedback, and of course the community events that are going to be coming up. And then it'll just depend on kind of how your guys' process goes. And what that will look like as far as how they can continue to engage. And so it's going to be a little bit fluid, but it's going to be just kind of keeping people, keeping transparency in the process and keeping them aware of what's going and how they can keep them informed, and then how they can stay engaged, basically. So that's the sort of immediate plans for what's going on. And it'll just sort of, I'll be here at the work sessions with everyone else, and those kind of go from there based on where your guys' decisions go and how things are moving along.
And once a decision is made, there'll certainly be that next kind of tier of communications that'll need to take place in terms of with students and parents and what's next. And so maybe the next time we'll add that to the report that we bring in front of the board of what that looks like once the board has made a decision. How long will it take us to redistrict? And how will parents find out about that information, and how might they be able to visit the next school that they would potentially go to, kind of all of those logistics, so we can bring that back for the board.
Okay, thank you, and I think the support for the principals becomes extremely important.
So having a little bit of experience now in this, last time Luke and I met with principals, we ended up meeting either weekly or bi-weekly throughout the spring and making sure that they had touch points with every department head and all the people that were part of the team to make sure that they were supported. And we went as much as possible to the schools in person and helped deliver those difficult messages and be there in front with them when they were talking to families, there in front with them when they were talking to their staff. So that would be our plan, except only even better than we did it because we have now some experience.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Doran?
I've got 1.5 left. One is kind of related to this. And it may be something that we need to look at in terms of process for the board as we look at it. Alternative suggestions. that I like the idea that we will get a short list, and then basically we'll be looking at each one and then deciding one or two or none. I mean, that's the decision that needs to be made. But I'm also just attuned to, having sat in the audience over the years, and enough time, a school name has been tossed out, and it's like, where is this coming from? So how we might, and I know we're already getting emails and, people thinking, oh, this one or that one or another one, how we want to guide our conversations. And there could be a legitimate reason for an alternate to wind up in the mix as the conversations go. So I'm just tossing it out as a procedural thing that we think how we want to deal with that, so we don't put individual school district or schools, communities at a loss, or unnecessary angst.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Certainly, it wouldn't be administration's recommendations to add any additional schools. We feel like the vetting process that we've gone through in terms of bringing schools to the board has been thorough and has applied the standards that we have set forth. So if the board, obviously the board has full discretion to add additional schools on the list. But at that point in time, you do run the risk, like you said, of creating additional anxiety and panic for a school community that might not have had that previous notice. And so that might be a process that President Hardy and I would need to work through if there were additional schools that the board would like to look at. I think it would be wise next week as we have the conversation and the schools that are listed, we have clear reasons why schools are on that short list, and we have clear reasons why schools that were off of the list are off the list. And so if there's questions at that point in time of, hey, why didn't such and such school make it on the list? Like, Rebecca's actually created a cheat sheet because we've gone through every school and have said, why not this school? Or why this school? And have gone down the list, and so we have very complete and valid reasons why certain schools didn't bubble up to that short list.
Is that a document that would be available for the board to look at, or would you prefer that not?
As of right now,
Not now, after we've released the names.
I think we will do our best to package together as much information as you can in terms of why schools made it on the list and then why schools haven't. And so can't guarantee anything at this time, but we'll try to make it as thorough as possible for the board.
Thanks. I think the public would appreciate that too. Mr. Burgess?
That was going to be my question is, can we I mean, exactly. Exactly that, and being able to, share those reasons with the public that a school or facility didn't make the list. I just think that's critical to transparency. That's a real important component of this, so thanks.
And just to Dr. Miner's point, and to that point, from the beginning of the process that we followed, and that process of going through every single school, the list evolved. The list changed. It was quite different from point A to point Z in our process that we followed to identify a short list.
Mr. Dorn?
To that one, and then I'll go to my last question for this point. I appreciate, and I think it helps our conversation if we have, why somebody is not and why somebody is. Question in terms of going back to the handback of the schools, of the buildings, to the borough. Is that a foregone conclusion that we're going to hand them back to the borough and be gone forever, or that we might decide to mothball one? I mean, I know we're trying to make long-term decisions, and it's not short-term. So if you could just address what the anticipation is there.
I think it's administration's recommendation that we would hand them back because that's the full amount of savings realized. So, as Mr. DeGraw has stated specific monetary amounts that would be saved, that did include the amount of utilities saved per year. But that's certainly open for conversation if the board felt like there was a necessary need for a facility that they wanted to keep on hand. I'm sure we could have that conversation with the board, but just know that, you know, there would be utilities involved and potentially deferred maintenance issues. And so that's something that the board would want to be well aware of, and we could provide additional information on what those costs would be down the road if the board is approaching a school closure but also wanted to hang on to the building.
I will add in there that in state statute, it says that charter schools have the option to move into any building that the school district is releasing before it's given back to the borough. So I know we didn't do that last time, and that's something, not that they ever would have. A lot of our charters have nice buildings, other ones don't, but that is in state statute. Ms. Peterson.
More of a comment than a question. Just once families maybe realize how school closures and the $28 million deficit is impacting them personally, they may be more willing to engage in conversations with legislators and borough assembly members about the deficit that we're facing. And it would be my hope that we would be able to continue to provide families with information about ways to have those crucial conversations and advocate for our students.
Mr. Burgess.
Thanks. Yeah, to those last couple of points that have been made, I guess I have a question that's been in the back of my head about, you know, when we reach a point of no return on a school closure, right? So, because we don't know what the state's going to give us yet, and we might not know till June, right? And so it's possible that we'll have more money than we expected in our budget. Will there be a point that it's too late to go back and say, okay, never mind, we're not closing this school? And what is that point?
I might have to think on if there is a specific point, but what I'll say is historically, you look back 15 years and the borough certainly has a downward trend in population, and we have a downward trend in enrollment in our schools. If we're looking for a long-term stabilized budget for the school district, I think making some of these difficult decisions sets us up for future stability, as hard as they are. I do think that it's our recommendation that the board takes some of these cost savings measures that not only saves us money this year, but into future years. Because what we know is we not only have we have a large deficit this year, we have another deficit coming the next year. And by, figuratively kicking that can down the road one more year, we could be in the very same position of looking at school closures and going through that whole process again. And so I don't know that I gave you the specific answer you're looking for. I'll ponder that a bit, but I hesitate throwing out, a specific date. But I would encourage the board to look at the historical trends and really, fully consider school closure as a way to stabilize budgets in the future.
Okay, that's a helpful answer, even if it isn't specific to, but I appreciate that. That's very thoughtful too. And can I ask a procedural question? Are we limited to discussing school closures and procedure tonight, or?
I think school closures and the budget is what was noticed. So
Okay.
underneath there.
Can I ask other questions about budget then? Okay, I'll come back around because I don't want to derail things right now.
Mr. Doran.
Could you clarify for us, or repeat for us, I think we've had broader conversation, the impetus for school closures at this point in time is certainly the budget. We're over the cliff. But I think you've also, and we've talked about a little bit, there are your approach to trying to go towards how does it benefit instruction. And because of some situations that have been raised, what we can offer, and I think you reference this, secondary as well as elementary staffing, we have vacancies. So it's a bigger picture than just a financial, though that is the greatest impetus to say, hey, we need to look at this, but long-term, there's the bigger picture. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're definitely correct. I mean, there's the educational outcomes that we're really focused on, and some of these difficult decisions help us get at continuing to hopefully improve educational opportunities. And then when you're talking specifically about PTR offset, even higher PTRs than what we might have, which does have a direct correlation on student achievement in the classroom. And so if it's not a school closure, if it's not a contracting of custodial, if it's not one of these bigger items that gets at millions of dollars worth of cuts, then what is it going to be to maintain those class sizes that we have and not add even more students to those classes?
I guess I'll add in, like, it has taken me quite a while. If you'd asked me this summer, would I ever support closing another school? I would have told you no. In fact, I think I told people like, that is not something I support. And, you know, as we learn, we grow, and we're funding a lot of square footage that's not being used. And that, in turn, is meaning we have to have higher class sizes. It, in turn, is meaning we need to contract out custodial. I was part of, and I know Mr. Burgess was too, the baby boom here in Fairbanks. When I attended Joyce School, we had classes out in portables, and then we built Anween, and then we built Randy Smith, and we kept building because we needed it, and we had the pupil, you know, the amount of students to justify those buildings, but we don't have that many students anymore, and so we can keep funding buildings, or we can start funding our classrooms, and that's heartbreaking to me. I was a Cubby Bear. I have taught at many of the schools across the district. It's a personal thing to close a school. But sometimes we get elected to make really tough choices. And I would like to preserve the things we know impact our students, the things we know help our families, help our educators. And if that means we have to make really difficult votes, then that's why we signed up for this.
Any additional school closure questions, or did we want to go to Mr. Burgess's budget question?
Mr. Burgess.
So I guess I wanted to visit the, you mentioned it just now, Dr. Meinert, the contracting out custodial. Because I had the same question on that as about, you know, when is it too late to turn back on that one? Maybe that one's easier to answer, I don't know. But it's, you know, and then I also wanted to understand better who we're impacting, how long these people have been with the district, and you know, search for alternatives, frankly.
Sorry for the delay. I was just taking note to make sure I got down what you said. And so I'll provide an initial answer, and then I'll double check with Andy to make sure this is the correct answer on custodial in terms of the no going back date. And so it would be my understanding that after a contract is signed with, you know, a particular company, that would be the moment that we wouldn't be able to go back on that decision.
And then just to add on to that, yes, correct, the signing of a contract. And then for a contractor to stand up the operation, they're typically going to need a minimum 60 days. So kind of the end of April timeline would be the kind of point of no return for a contractor to begin on July 1, if that were the date.
Ms. Burnett.
Why the heck not, since we're on this subject? In our last work session, we had brought up the calendar days and possibly maybe shortening days, if I remember correctly. Would 2 days maybe get us enough to replace the custodial Or I remember something about 3 days was like $3 million, correct? So would there be a way to implement there for the custodial?
So, yeah. So just to give context to the board on numbers, each day roughly represents a savings potential of around $600,000 each day. So the $3 million was a reflection of 5 days reduced. And yeah, I think administration is going to have our recommendations, but certainly it's a possibility to mix and match here. I think that was the second part of your question. Yes, absolutely.
And I do want to be upfront about the school calendar. We've had conversations with our labor unions and ongoing conversations, but we definitely want to be in partnership with them. And if that's something that their membership would pursue, we would certainly need a MOA from the district in partnership with the labor unions to move forward with that. And so while there's certainly savings potentially there, it would take a fair amount of sacrifice for everybody involved to make that realized.
Right, got it. Thank you.
Ms. Logan?
So to add on to Mr. Burgess's question, excuse me, it'd be impacting about 100 custodians. I have one that I know has been on staff for almost 35 years.
Mr. Burgess? Nope, you're good. Mr. Doran?
While we're on the custodian thing, I know you indicated that you've asked for different scenarios for the contracting, and I do want to express as we go into the conversations and look at actual numbers and see whether they do actually pan out or not, that the day custodian should definitely stay as a school district employee, knowing the absolute integration of meeting needs in a school that the day custodian provides is crucial, and their flexibility to meet needs in a school that you don't see in a contract. The other one is giving careful consideration to the lead, because they pick up where the day custodian ends their day, and they are there with the contact to the public and addressing issues, after school programs, building rentals, things of that sort, which come back to the principal if they don't pan out. But they absolutely represent our district in the people-to-people contact, and not to diminish what those who come in focused on cleaning solely at the late night shifts. I've been there at midnight, I've been there at 5 in the morning, I've seen them working, I've seen them adapt to teachers, but that to me is much more contractual possibilities of getting work done. But I think the other two are absolutely key in representing our district and what our missions are.
Yeah, so I did want to let the board know that we'll have the February 26th work session. I believe the main focus of that work session will be custodial, or at least a large part of it. So we'll hear from Jay and Andy more about that and be able to answer additional questions. So not that we can't have them now, but did want the board to know that we'll be providing more information at that time.
Ms. McDaniels?
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on Mr. Burgess's question, and then I can also give you some numbers as well, because if you're looking at the very first scenario where all of custodial is contracted, you're looking at 93 employees that would be effective, versus the second scenario, you would look at 67 total custodians that are affected. But when you talked about I believe you called it the date, to the no return date is what you referred to it as. And I just wanted to put out there, as you're talking about the contract, we look at it, I look at it from the employee perspective. And so by contract, we have 10 working days to provide our support staff notice of a change in their working status. So it's a little bit different than teachers. So while we always would hope to provide more than a 10-day notice, obviously, because that's a very short turnaround, by contract, we have 10 working days to provide them notice of that layoff. So just wanted to provide that context as well.
Ms. Logan?
I just want to mention that Matsu did this. I've said this several times. Matsu did this a few years back. It did not work. Within a year and a half, they were recalling back all their custodians, and because their buildings were not cleaned up to the school district standards. Their buildings were not getting clean. The bathrooms weren't getting clean. Things were walking out of the buildings. So really, please, I will keep saying it. I do not support this, and I will argue this because we want our students to have the best buildings. We want them to have the pride that their custodians give them. And I just want to look at Matsu from a couple years ago when, you know, things weren't getting done by their contractors.
Mr. Burgess?
You don't have to answer this now, but through the chair to the administration, I would like information, if you can even get it, on what the difference between the wages that contracted custodial staff would be earning compared to what we're paying. I mean, I'm assuming wages and benefits are less for contracted staff, which is why it's cheaper. But I think that's, you know, that's something that I would like to know more information of if it's possible to get it.
Yeah, we'll be able to get that information with RFP submissions and present that all out to the board.
Mr. Doran?
When is our RFPs due? So I'm assuming before the 26th, so we'll have concrete numbers.
Due March 8th.
Oh, so we won't know numbers. Okay.
We hope to be able to report numbers to the board middle of March.
Okay. All right, we're going to pivot now to transportation and have Andy DeGraw talk about that $800,000 general fund transfer to the transportation fund balance. And a question for Jasmine, can he air tame?
All right, thank you, Dr. Minor. I'm going to zoom a little bit here. Oh, that's a sensitive deal here. Oh, man. All right. There we go. All right, so on your screen, you'll see some estimated numbers that we've put together. And I went over these last time, but I just went back and verified, sharpened the pencil, and these are really good estimated numbers. I didn't want to go, you know, $4,136,718 on the board. So $4.1 million is the available fund balance. That's over here in the notes column. It has gives some information how we get to those numbers. So it's the end of FY23. These are audited figures, roughly $1 million in restricted fund balance, and then $3.1 million in unrestricted. So the $1 million would be dollars from the state of Alaska transportation grant, and then $3.1 million roughly transfers from the general fund. our anticipated FY24 deficit, so current year, this is also estimated roughly $2.4 million is what we're anticipating the deficit to be by year end. That's following the current trend. We should end up right around an 84 average route count for the year. We started lower. We're approaching the 90 route mark. And so full year average right around 84 routes. And we expect that to be the end of year average. That would leave us, so anticipated fund balance at the end of FY24 should be right around $1.7 million. And so then looking at anticipated costs for FY25, this really could be a conservative number. I think it's a low number. So we're assuming an 85 because our contractor is trending upward significantly. They're recruiting and finding and bringing on significant numbers of drivers pretty consistently. So assuming 85 routes for the FY25 school year, we do know that we're going to see a 1.5% inflation factor applied to route fees, daily route fees. We expect roughly a $2.6 million deficit based on those assumptions. That would leave us approximately a $900,000 deficit in our fund balance position at the end of FY25. So again, a lot of it is determined on the assumptions here that we see, but these are very on the top side for current year. This is the final numbers are going to come in really close to this because we're well over halfway through the year, and then next year. Again, in my estimation, those are some conservative numbers because, again, the contractor's trending in the upward direction on driver recruitment. That's my report.
Mr. Doran.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions to make sure I understand it. At the end of FY24, you expect a deficit of 2.4 million?
Yes, so not in the fund balance position. A deficit comparing FY24 revenue from the state grant compared to anticipated expenditures. So an annual deficit of $2.4 million.
So that, okay.
Which,
sorry,
to finish,
does it mean we are subsidizing transportation at 2.4 million?
Not from the general fund, from our fund balance. So the top line, to get to the 1.7 million anticipated fund balance at the end of FY24, we're subtracting the 2.4 million from the top line, $4.1 million fund balance in our transportation fund. So we are funding the deficit with fund balance. And this is what has allowed us to zero out that annual subsidy over the past 2 to 3 years, utilizing fund balance instead of transfer.
And could I ask about how much do we get from the state?
It's a little over 10 million. It's between 10 million and 10.5 million. And
it costs us about 13 million then.
Yeah, 13 plus. You know, these are at we don't want to look at the numbers at, 105, 115 routes. These are at 84, 85.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, at full service, they're large, over $4 million. The annual deficit. Just some context to that. I've talked about this a little bit in the past. One of the flaws on our end, from our position of transportation funding, is it's per brick and mortar student, and we have to cover the same geographic territory regardless of how many students. It becomes less efficient. We have to run the same buses out, and they're, if we're dropping an enrollment, then they're running emptier and emptier. But we have to have a bus, we have to fuel the bus, we have to have a driver. All those costs increasing as they're funding lower amounts because it's based on brick and mortar enrollment. So it's really a flawed way to fund transportation, in my opinion.
Put me back in the queue.
All right. Mr. Burgess?
So this is probably going to sound like a real oddball question, but today, before I came here, I visited my dentist because got to do all the fun things on your birthday. And my hygienist mentioned that in California they have a fee for students' transportation. Is that an option? Not an option? Good idea? Bad idea? Just something I hadn't even considered before, but thought I would throw it out.
Yeah, so I know in the state of South Dakota, I know it's pay to play for transportation as well. So there's probably a few states out there that do that. We're not aware of state law speaking to that or preventing us from doing that. So, you know, that's certainly something that barring, we can go back and make sure of that, but barring any statute or ordinance or rule preventing us from doing that could be an option.
Okay. And just to be clear, if I might follow up, I'm not necessarily wanting to pursue that option, but it was something that was mentioned to me and thought, well, hey, there's a possibility. I do think there's some equity issues in something like that. So that's, you know, I'm not pushing that right now, but maybe something to think about in the future.
Dr. Minor?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because as we've mentioned to the board, while this next, you know, FY25 budget has that $800,000 transfer in it without increased transportation, we're looking at a $3 to $4 million transfer in FY26. And so at that time, that might be a serious consideration of the board if there's not increased funding at the state level, or I think Mr. Doran has talked about this, looking at different ways to structure things. And so the silver lining in all of this is I do believe a lot of our representatives understand the real need for an increase in transportation funding, and so we're hopeful that will come through and help us out with this situation.
I'm going to ask some, and then, so looking at that document, we have the 3.1 million in unrestricted funds. That's money that we've already subsidized transportation with because it's unrestricted, right?
Correct.
Okay, so even in low budget years, we've been consistently millions of dollars now.
Yeah, the last transfer I would say was probably at least 3 years ago. So it's been a few years.
We've had 8 years of flat funding.
Correct,
I think we
yeah.
can say we've been subsidizing transportation.
Yes, we have.
Which is the state is supposed to fund an increase. So how many routes, if we were actually able to fill all our contracted routes, do we have?
Contracted?
Yeah, so I know we've got 84 right now. We're thinking 85 next year. I thought it was like maybe 115.
115 is the contracted number of routes, yes.
So the only reason we're not even more heavily subsidizing is because we can't fill all of those routes.
Correct. It would be driver recruitment issues, yes.
Okay, and then the last one, and then I'll stop and let other people. With the proposed transportation increase in SB 140, what would that mean for us? Is that enough?
It's not. It's approximately between $1 and $1.1 million to Fairbanks last time I saw the numbers.
I lied. One last one. That's funded per student and not on geographic area?
Correct. It was increasing the multiplier by each brick and mortar student.
Mr. Doran.
If we were to just take the state funding, how many routes would that approximately? I know that there's a calculation there, but give me a ballpark.
Yeah, so I'm not necessarily able to say the exact number of routes. I'm going to give a short answer to that. Yep. Yeah,
Would it be less than our 85 versus, we know it would be less than our 115?
Significantly less than 115, less than our current average of 84 routes. It would be less than that. And I mentioned this before, and you know, I think it's good for the public to hear as well. It's not a simple issue of just being able to reduce and go right straight to the state grant, because we have minimum special ed requirements that we need to handle. You know, McKinney-Vento federal requirements related to special ed and those various grants. So when we look at how many resources it takes to meet those needs, and then the leftover, if that's not enough to really provide even a base minimum for regular routes, then it becomes really challenging. And we can provide, some level of detail to that in a future meeting, but that's the general gist of what we're looking at, if we're looking to fund straight to what the state's providing. Now, if we do see a $1.1 million increase, then that could come more into play and really help us significantly to possibly do that, meet services with exactly the revenue that we're receiving.
Online.
Nope. You can go one more, then I'll going.
Okay. So I'm going to put out here, and I'll come back to it a little bit later. But I've been building a scenario of building a pool of money to the side, and adding those, all of which is in that pool, we should be providing. So I want to premise with that, and adding them to our priority add back list. We only have one item on there right now in terms of the PTR, but we know where that's going to grow. And one of the pieces of that is the 800,000 from transportation subsidy. We're already subsidizing it significantly. If the state, that's what they want, then either fund it, and if we get the funding, we can add back. So that's a piece that I'm going to advocate, that we have a serious conversation. I've got 9 items. I'm at about 2.5 million. I'm pushing 3 million, working towards that. But I'll bring those up later tonight, at least to get them on the conversation.
Ms. Burnett?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, just because I've never asked this question before and really dug into the transportation side of it, what all is included in the budget? Does that include the contract with Durham, the fuel, the maintenance, the storing of the buses? Is that it's all inclusive to all that?
All inclusive. And then we have 3 district level employees, Mr. Hinton, and then 2 folks that work in his office.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes, I can ask some of mine. When was the last time that the state increased our transportation funding?
It's 1 more year than the last time the BSA was increased. So if it's 7 years on the BSA, it's
2016.
16, yeah. Yeah, 17's the common date for the BSA, last BSA increase, yeah, 2016.
That speaks volumes.
A little more context, we need about a 35% increase in transportation funding to meet the cost of 115 routes.
So I know we asked this before, but were you able to get how much we spend on special education transportation?
I think we do have that, and we'll get that out to the board in an email.
Okay. And then kind of follow up on that one, does the federal government that requires, it's part of the IEP, special education transportation, pay it all for SPED transportation? I already know IDA is not fully funded, so is that part of it?
Could you restate that question?
Well, when we talk about our funding sources, we have federal funding that comes into, and the IDA, that creates special education as we know it, has never been fully funded since the creation of the bill. So that they funded it at the highest, 70%, Kate, or she? Okay. And I'm
not fully funded.
The federal government has provided 19% at its highest point.
Yeah, it's not great. So, but yet we have to meet federal mandates. And then on top of that, it passes to the state. There's lots of problems that are just part of the system, and this is one of them. And I know it's a lot harder to yell at the federal government than it is to yell at the state, but this is part of the problem when we say SPED is underfunded. SPED is underfunded in every way, from the state, from the federal government, and part of it is we're spending a lot of money on transportation, and it doesn't sound like the state is supporting it, and it doesn't sound like the federal government gives us any money either.
Correct. Yeah, we might receive a little bit from McKinney-Vento, but we subsidize that program tremendously. It costs us hundreds of thousands of dollars each year just for foster and homeless students experiencing homeless transportation needs.
Yeah, and that's a completely different thing than IDA funding and SPED.
Right, right.
Okay. No.
But yeah, just the focus to that question, the answer to that question, President Hardy, is the district spends upwards of $400,000 or $500,000 a year just in meeting those needs, and it's unfunded by any organization.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll transition to Chain Beam to talk about curriculum materials.
Hi, thank you. Just a quick history for the board members who are new. 2 years ago, the budget for textbook materials was $915,000. Last year was cut to $500,000, so we cut it by $415,000. And then the ask is to bump it back up to the original $915,000. So then the next question is, well, how far does $915,000 go? Because that's a lot of money. So just again, for some context of what does $915,000 mean in this case. Last year, we purchased through a grant K-5 language arts materials, and that was $1.5 million for K-5. Last year, we purchased just middle school science, and that was $200,000, just middle school science. So $900,000 is a lot of money, but it gets eaten up very quickly when you start buying textbooks. So last year, when we were cut by the $415,000, what that meant is some things had to be pushed. So the things basically that were pushed last year was all of high school science. So this year, if we were to get the full $915,000, we would catch up on the high school science textbooks. That's AP Chem, AP Physics, Physics, Biology, all of the high school sciences that we did not purchase last year. We would catch up on those. We would also catch up on K-5 PE, which was approved last year, but we did not purchase. And then also K-5 Science. We would catch up on all of those. All of those, just the catch-up that we didn't purchase last year, would run about $340,000. So $340,000, we still have a good chunk of money for left over from the $900,000. So now we need to think about purchasing what we're supposed to be purchasing this year, which would now be world language, which is mostly Spanish books, music for K-5, music for middle school, high school, and we don't have quotes for those yet. But then it goes to, well, what if we don't get the 415? What if it's taken out and we are back to the back to the $500,000 flat that we had last year? What that means is we would still purchase the things that we're behind on, but then everything else would have to get pushed. Spanish would get pushed, music would get pushed. A few other, honestly, science high school things might get pushed also. So then it's just a matter of once this board decides what that number will be, it'll be my job to go and figure out what's the oldest things that we need to replace, what is more due than the other things, what do we need to purchase, and then I would go. But some things would absolutely be pushed to the following year.
Mr. Burgess?
Can you speak a little bit to the impact that would have on education and on our teachers' ability to give instruction based on our current curriculum?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is nearly impossible to purchase new textbooks without the online products that come with them. In fact, there are some textbooks that you can't buy textbooks anymore. You can only buy online versions. So what we're doing now is, if we're not able to purchase some of the, our new items, which, by the way, since curriculum goes on a rotation, we have not purchased new high school science materials for at least 7 years. So that's how old our textbooks are. So if we are unable to, what could potentially happen is we need to go searching for, or rather our teachers will end up searching for things online, which is not our favorite thing. We prefer to give them the things that meet the standards to make sure that we're hitting what we're supposed to be hitting. Students would potentially not be able to have the online access to things, because we would just have, when you can buy a textbook, that's fine. And that could last for a long time, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. Online access goes away after the contract goes away. So we might have textbooks maybe that are 6 or 7 years old, but the online access is gone. And for teachers in particular, teachers use quite a bit of online access. It helps them with their lesson plans. It comes with PowerPoints, it comes with lessons, it comes with everything. And all the things that used to be in a hardcover teacher edition quite often now come in only online versions.
Ms. Burnett?
Could we get a quote possibly on how much the music curriculum, the music books would cost? I'd be curious and to see what the cost of that is.
We can. Honestly, the music is not going to, like, K-5 will be a little bit, high school will be a little, but it won't equal to the middle school science, like 200,000. It'll be a much smaller number than that.
Mr. Doran?
Okay. I appreciate that detail and breakdown because it really helps. I am going to advocate it. This is part of my pool money because what I'm trying to look at, and so we understand, is these are needed materials. They're important materials, but they can be pushed. And I've watched this before, where we had math textbooks for 12 years, which is too long to go without the new ones. But we could teach, and the importance was, what I'm looking at is how do we protect the classroom? And we can teach a lot with using existing materials, but I do appreciate the information you're providing tonight in terms of some of the online things not being available, although whether they can be not replaced necessarily, but complemented with some of the free information that is online also, particularly in these areas. But I think we can, and again, I want to say that if we do move it off, I would see this as on our add back list, so that, because again, we don't want to wind up in that 12-year time frame where we're finally getting new textbooks.
Excuse me. All right. Well, we'll move to our final report of the evening then. RJ will talk IT equipment replacement.
Thank you. Before we get to that, can I add one comment to what Jane was saying?
Recording stop. Recording in progress.
When educators and students go onto the internet to look for course materials that they do not have through official approved channels, it adds a security risk to the information technology department when it comes to our antivirus and potential links asking for data that we don't want people to give. And so that's not something that we want to have happen, and I hope that's supportive of what Jane was saying. Okay, so to the equipment replacement. This is something that's near and dear to my heart because this is laptops that will directly go into the hands of our educators to make their day-to-day experience here at the district better. So we're looking at 1,200 MacBook Airs with 4 years of AppleCare. to replace the devices they currently have, which are 4 years old roughly, which means their current devices are going out of support with Apple October 31st. So November 1st, they will no longer get operating system updates. So one thing to go with that, a question could be, well, we have antivirus. And it's true, we have antivirus, but they serve different functions. The antivirus is developed by software companies that look at threats on the internet that are going around, and they develop software to block those current threats. Whereas Apple Support looks at the hardware and software on the devices of their computers and fixes those. So you need both to have a robust protection of the device, right? An attack that goes towards the hardware and Apple software will get by our antivirus that is looking for online threats and vice versa. So I think it's vital that we replace these aging MacBooks that they have. So another thing is if we can replace these devices before they go end of life, October 31st, we will be able to sell them. And so our estimates are that they'll be worth about $200, so that's about $225,000 total that we'd be able to sell them for, which we would not be able to get if we sell them after the support date. So those are the numbers there. And then when it comes to how do we roll them out, it depends on when we get the funding to make the purchase, because we would like to get these in the hands of the educators as soon as they can, so they have the opportunity to get these ready before they need to use them for instruction. From previous times that we've done this, the numbers we came up with is the transfer of data from when someone brings us their current device and we hand them their device is an hour and a half time for an IT technician to work with them. The laptops that come back, they have an average of 80 gigs of data on them. And so that's something currently we just do that transfer, and that's part of the hour and a half of staff time. What we could do going forward is look at the types of data that we want to take forward to these new devices, which I think is a wise thing to do. Something like not take the photos, not take any iTunes library, things of that nature, which we haven't done in the past. Another opportunity is we could tell the employees that they need to upload that information to our Google Drive that everyone has access to. And that way they bring in a device, we hand out a device, and then they can bring the stuff back from Google Cloud for them. So these are the types of things we're looking at to improve the experience that our educators have when they turn in a device and we give them a new device. So those are the kind of the two prongs of this. One is the procurement and the other is the support. So thank you.
Ms. Burnett.
How soon could we have the funds available to replace these? I know we have a lot of teachers struggling, and if we want to get something out of them, we would want to have new ones in place, I'm assuming by September?
Yeah, so if the board was going to include this funding in the proposed budget, not strip it out, we would start the process in the spring to be able to replace those devices, to have them ready for the beginning of school year 25.
And we have, sorry if I may add another comment, we've learned that the sooner the better, especially if we want to be able to sell these. You know, if we wait into the school year, we may not be able to get them back and ready to go by October 31st. So my staff were talking about in-service days before the school year starts, or any other time before.
Mr. Doran?
Thank you. You mentioning approximately 200,000 that we might be able to sell them. It's but that would be an offset to what's in the budget for that is 386,000 right now.
That's correct. Yeah, and we have actually sold laptops before to Diamond High School. So this is a real thing that we've done. It's not like a ephemeral we could do.
Okay. And if I might, how much do we have in our equipment fund? Is it 1.7 or about that?
Give me a minute and I'll come back and I'll raise my hand when I got that number.
All right, do a follow-up or connected to that?
Sure.
Okay, so part of my question is, again, the 386 educator laptop line item is in my pool to set aside that could be used for PTR, custodial, school, whatever. So that's what I'm looking at, is something to that. So what I don't understand is why, if we have a significant dollar amount in the equipment fund, I was here when they set that up, it's a good idea, it's there, but why we can't take that out of that equipment fund rather than having to add 386. And again, I would put this on our add back consideration list. So if we get funding, then we know we can continue to do, but that's part of that equipment fund, not only students, but for staff and other needs.
Yeah, so the fund balance currently at the end of FY23 is $2.8 million. However, these are large purchases we're talking about, and when we're talking about continuing the one-to-one support for Chromebooks and iPads in schools, those are significant dollars, up into the, not $1 million, but close, $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 a year. And when you're talking these devices, I believe it's, last time around it was somewhere in the $1.4 million range. So that 2.8 number drops quickly when we're talking about the needed purchases that are on the horizon. And to the point of kind of how this 386 works in correlation with the purchase of the staff devices and that 2.8 million, what we've done in the past, which works really well, is we've purchased those devices outright out of the equipment replacement fund, and we've avoided a whole process that we would have to go through with the borough if we don't do it that way. The district's not allowed to incur debt, and so at least technically is debt, so we'd have to go through that process. So this $386,000 budgeted amount is a 4-time payment to pay that purchase back out of that equipment replacement fund. So
Follow-up. Okay, so if I understand correctly, the $386,000 is to purchase these, which I think is a good idea. Why can't it come out of why does it have to be an extra as opposed to coming out of that fund? Because that's what that fund is for. And I recognize we've worked hard for quite a number of years for a one-to-one, but difference between, we may not be able to afford one-to-one because the state doesn't value it. So that's why I'm trying to think, it's saying what are the trade-offs, that if we get funding from the state, then that go into our conversation for adding back, that we can do that. But I'm looking at students in the classroom versus things we can share.
yeah, so technically, Mr. Doran, you are correct. We could make these purchases and cancel out the 386,000. What we're doing is, and it's the same, it's my response would be to the topic of the curriculum is, we've heard Dr. Meinert talk about in relation to school closures, a sustainable, permanent savings. And so absolutely, we're gonna have to do a lot of what you're doing, Mr. Doran, but these aren't permanent. What's happening is there's a snowball effect occurring on the side here. And so that's all I would caution against is when there's tight budgets, it's making sure we understand the magnitude of when we're stripping things out. And then if, we took it out last year, if we take it out again this year, it becomes easier and easier and easier just to keep it out. So that's my cautionary 2 cents, but you're correct. We could not redeposit that 386 and still be above water, but we'd be on a trend and a pathway to being into the negative within probably a year or two in that fund if we don't continue to replenish it.
Right, and granted, I fully agree with that, but if we're not funded, we're not going to be able to provide what we've provided. And so I'm just putting it on the table as something that we consider when we're increasing classroom size significantly. You can do an awful lot with a smaller class, and we may have to do with less of some of the other. But anyway, just there. Thank you.
Mr. Stevens?
Thank you. I have a follow-up to that. So another hat that information technology wears is risk. And so if we do not replace these devices and they are out of support, the opportunity for a breach goes up by no fault necessarily of the educators or staff that are using these devices. Internet threats are a revolving door. There's always new threats. We take cybersecurity training, and you know it's an if, not an if, it's when someone clicks on something they shouldn't. And the risk of a breach when it involves student information is quite high. And even if people are not supposed to have student information on their laptops, people put their work on their laptops. It is something that will happen no matter what we tell them they should or should not do. And I can get you the information on this next part. Our insurance, as I read it for cybersecurity, would not cover something like this. If we don't pay support for these devices, then it's self-inflicted and they will not pay for our breach. I do have a meeting, I believe next week, with the borough risk officer and our policy, our insurers, to clarify points like this and others. But I must, you know, regardless of where the money comes from, it is my advice that we replace these devices somehow.
I'm going to go then Ms. Burnett, and then we'll circle back to you. So to what you were just speaking, that was my one question, and it's, I support, when we pulled it out last year, we were warned, like, that you can't continue to do this. You need to update those. So I support that, but you've said a few times, and I don't understand, that a 4-year-old laptop doesn't get software updates or doesn't get support.
It's tied together with AppleCare. Part of the support is providing the software and operating system fixes.
But like my own laptop is like a 5-year-old MacBook Air, and I download software updates all the time that get pushed out by Apple. That you mean there's something different or more to that?
So when the operating systems come out, they move up the minimum version that they will support. So, you know, there's old versions of the operating system from the past that you cannot get patches for, no matter how much money you try to give Apple. They just don't make them.
Okay.
So, and that's kind of what we're running up against.
Thank you. Ms. Burnett.
Thank you. So first, how many laptops did you say it was that we're replacing this year?
1,200 is what we're looking for.
Is there more than that in the district? When would we need to replace more again is my, so like, if that's how many we have this year that are out of date, how many are there out there that may still have a year or two on them, or does that cover everything?
I'll have to get you that number.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just curious on how many laptops may still be out there, or even computers, any type of technology that we have out there that might not be included in this, that we may need to update in a year or two. That would just be nice to know for future budgets. And then, nope, I guess that's all of it. Thank you. I have written them down.
Mr. Doran.
And I just want to clarify, I am fully supportive of buying the educator laptops. I just question where we take the money from, and that would give us $386,000 or thereabouts that we could use more directly for other supports that I think we need to have.
Thank you.
Ms. Peterson.
2 quick comments. First, I truly appreciate that student teachers are now able to use the school district computers. They haven't been in the past, and that has always been a concern of mine, not only for their ability to provide the best education to our students, but also because of the safety concerns and having students up at UAF or anywhere else having vital student data on their own personal computers has always made me nervous. So I truly appreciate that happening, and I hope that will continue. And then a second point, I have always been truly impressed by IT when they swoop into a building and they do those downloads and switch out computers. And even though it sounds like 90 minutes is a long period of time, they're able to do it so efficiently because they're doing so many computers at once. And there's just been great communication in the past, letting educators know that they're going to be at a specific building on a given day, and maybe they should plan a low-tech lesson that day, and it works really well, and I really appreciate that and hope that that communication will continue.
I appreciate that. When it comes to the rollout plan, we've calculated for 5 techs. It's about 6 days for each tech, and we keep it open for about 3 weeks so that educators have time in their schedule to come as needed.
Mr. Doran, would you like to speak about your pool?
Okay. With pleasure. Okay, and some of these may be things that administration will need to get more specifics and be able to address, and depend on how broad a interest that the board has. So I've got 9 things. I've mentioned transportation, about 800,000, curriculum, about 415,000. I have a question about READS Act, and I don't know whether the figure was accurate as reported in the paper, but they referenced about $5.5 million it costs us to do. That if the state doesn't fund it, we can't do all of it. And my thinking is the main point that the READS Act keeps hitting is small groups. When we make classes larger, we get further away from small groups. Even when you break that down into small groups, those small groups get larger. So just as a starting point of placekeeper, I took off 500,000, which is a minimum, and I think it might be higher. Particularly looking at the before, after school tutoring, the summer program. I mean, if the state can't do it, if we can't do it, the state can't do it. So, keeping in mind what the intent of the act is. Supplies, I'm going to put out there for 50% cut. Okay, I've experienced as a principal in July, got a 50% cut in our supplies. But again, I'm looking at people in the classroom and that time with students. I don't know what that dollar amount would be, so I didn't attach a dollar amount to it, but a target of 50%. Equipment replacement, we've talked about 356,000. The district administration, and this is not in any order of priority or anything like this. Perhaps adding another 200,000, again, a dollar target that administration has asked for rather than specifics. And so and I guess on READS Act, it would be a target administration can see what and where DEED will tolerate. But putting up another 200,000 in district administration, I will say one of the reasons where I came into that was looking at the personnel comparisons. Schools are taking the major hit, district administration, and I want to clarify, because we've seen this over the last 10, 12 years, some of the district assigned positions actually are in the schools. They're not in the administration part. And so for the listening public, that has to be a reality. There's a difference there. ELP, eliminating it on the basis that if we get down to 4 elementary, how much service that can actually provide, and if we're better off benefiting those students who have needs integrated within the program. And so it's about another 400,000 or so. I don't like mentioning a school, except I don't know how to get around it before I at least had a chance to talk to the principal. But looking at the staffing numbers, it appears to me, and I may be wrong, but when I look at population and enrollment and certified staff, Barnett looks like it's 1 or 2 teachers. That leaves room if they were to be staffed at the same as the other schools. And treating magnet schools the same, we're doing that at Hutch. So,
Can I ask a clarifier
Sure.
on that? Is your calculation in addition to the 2 FTE that we cut in the proposed budget for Barnett?
that may be a clarification that I'm looking for, but they have 25 and a half certified staff, which for 422 projected enrollment, and that is 4 higher than the other schools with closer to 450 students. So, I mean, and I think I appreciate the question, because just putting this on the table, there may be information I don't know, but that's what caught my eye, is the significant difference. And I know you have a mix there with some middle school calculations, but that actually is higher numbers, PTR, but we have to cover discipline. So I'm just putting it out there, and come back and give me more clarification, and I might back off that. But the thing is, it was, I think, 4 teachers higher than other schools with higher enrollments in terms of the certified staff.
We can definitely take a look at that.
So I think those are, and then I put out there, again, on the table, Star of the North, small, changing. It has changed significantly in its mission. I know there are different things, but if we have room in schools, we can look at that. So, and I didn't put a dollar figure on that. So those are the 9 I have at this point. And my context of kind of seeing a pool, as I said, right now, it's somewhere between 2.5 to 3 million. As we look in our conversations, I'll put out for the board that we're pushing classes extremely large, and when we do that, we're also comparing them to our charter schools with much smaller PTR. That has a major impact on our families. That's part of their consideration when they look at classes at schools. It's one factor, but I'd rather get smaller classrooms, even if we have less services. And my hope is that indeed the state will come through with a very large investment in public education. And then we can, these are all important things.
Can I make some initial comments to some of those? The READS Act portion is interesting. Certainly if we moved in that direction, we'd want consensus from the board that we would be bumping up against the state in terms of not providing the state mandated after-school support and summer school offerings. I wouldn't want to be out there on a limb by myself and doing that. And so if the board went in that direction, full knowledge that that's the direction that we would be headed with that. Supplies, you referenced, undertaking this as a principal. My only comment to that is I think supply budgets were much larger then than they are now. And so now we're taking a smaller pie and even dividing it in half, which is related to services in the classroom and would certainly be felt by schools and principals. And so just want folks to know that all of these cuts, none of the cuts you proposed are easy by any of the stretch of the imagination, and neither are the ones that administration proposed, but that there would be real feelings around that. And then Star of the North, there is one more year on their contract before an out clause, and so if that's of interest to the board in terms of potentially moving that program, I believe that discussion would be best for the FY26 budget. But something that we've looked at as a potential cost savings measure in the future.
If I just, thank you. And my purpose, again, is I'd rather not be here March 20th, 21st, and I've sat in the audience while boards made decisions at the last minute, so I'm trying to put them out early, and that we know the implications of them.
All right, it looks like we are adjourned unless there's any board members wanting to make a closing comment. We are adjourned.